He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we are diving back into the extraterrestrial realm. Now, last week we explored Tessie of Lake Tahoe and took a look at an update regarding the Loch Ness Monster. And for more episodes, though, be sure to check us out on our main podcast feeds, and should you wish to reach us directly, you can do so via cryptidclues@gmail.com. Now, someone recently told me, hey, did you notice all that UFO, UAP stuff just kind of got swept under the rug? It just suddenly just disappeared. No one's talking about it anymore. And I thought, my gosh, you're right. We went through something truly out of this world back in New Jersey with a plethora of other occurrences, and we aren't talking about it anymore. So I'm here today because I want to keep the conversation going and piggybacking off of what started a couple weeks ago in an episode this time with more of a focus on Canada, because we aren't devoid of extraterrestrial occurrences out here, believe it or not. And we've done a few episodes on mysterious flying objects that Canadian airline pilots have spotted, flying around 30 to 40,000 feet. But I thought, okay, let's just kind of take it down a notch more to ground level and just kind of analyze some things. So we're going to start with some fun facts here. If you live in Alberta, did you know that out of all of Canada, you are the second most likely to be abducted by aliens? As of January 1st, 2025, Alberta's population is estimated to be around 4.9 million, give or take a few thousand, with a growth of over 221,000 people over the previous year. Now, if my math is correct, again, which I'd say give or take a few digits, around 1 in every 700 Albertans report a sighting of an unidentified flying object. Now, that's spotting something in the sky. Now, believe it or not, and I didn't at first, Ontario is at the top of the list to be most likely abducted. Now, Alberta's second, Ontario's first. That's around 1 in every 667 sightings. Now, the province where you're least likely to be abducted is Newfoundland and Labrador, that's around 1 sighting in every 8,962 people. But, of course, these populations are much smaller. Alberta has so far seen a few sightings this year, with the most recently reported one this past February being in Strathmore. It's about 50 kilometers east of Calgary. And I quote, "Off the side of the road about 40 feet up, a small white oval aerial craft flashed, zoomed down 2 feet with a neon green tail." End quote. A couple of months prior in December, a resident of Edmonton was taking photos when they spotted something inexplainable. And I quote, "While I was taking pictures on my balcony, 2 discs floated across the sky without noise. They were in sync." End quote. And just prior to that in Calgary, an individual saw a rectangular craft emerge in the sky. It descended and vanished like a train entering a tunnel. Now, if you're watching the YouTube version of this episode, I'll have a map popping up right now, and you want to note the red dots. For those audio listeners, I'll detail this out for you a little bit here as best as I can. So it's an overhead look of Canada, and it provides a look at UFO sightings spread over our entire country. Now, in British Columbia, specifically, I'd say the lower mainland, you'll see a large concentration, but things start to break up a bit once you move a little bit more central. Heading east into the adjacent provinces, you'll see things pick up some more in Alberta. Things fizzle out as we continue on towards the east, but a concentration picks back up in the southern part of Ontario. Now, like we mentioned before, location and population density are factors in this map layout. Canada's highest populations are all condensed heavily south of the country, closer to the Canada-US border. And it's not devoid of big cities, more north in some provinces, but there aren't any Vancouvers or Torontos north. I mean, you got British Columbia, you got Prince George, and you, of course, again, in Edmonton is more north of an Alberta. So there are some places that are larger, but they're not massive. Then, as the saying goes, people go south for the winter, and in the case of Canada, that seems to be all year round. But I digress. The map shows signs in the upper northern parts of the country, but nothing heavily concentrated. From the few highlighted sightings so far, the people seem to be seeing these classic shapes, ovals, rectangles, and orbs with mysterious lights on them as they all move around. And when we look at the National UFO Reporting Center, which is where reports affiliated with UAP UFO sightings are published, we can see several spheres, ovals, and dare I say, most prominently spotted object is orbs. This center, however, segues us to another fairly new project within Canada. This is called the Skye Canada Project. Now, let it be known that this project is not intended to access and collect first-hand data, like photos, testimonies, and such, nor is it intended to make the OCSA, the Office of the Chief Science Advisor, the main point of contact for Canadians wishing to report observations or personal experiences. Furthermore, it is not meant to prove or disprove the existence of extraterrestrial life or extraterrestrial visitors. That's a disclaimer pulled right off the Canadian government website. Now, the Skye Canada Project was initiated to review current practices surrounding the public reporting of unidentified aerial phenomena in Canada. Due to the increase in public interest and recent developments in other countries regarding UAP sightings, this project was formed. The studies conducted explore current reporting landscapes, identifying gaps, and providing recommendations to enhance the transparency and scientific inquiry on UAP issues in Canada. And on this project, the Chief Science Advisor published a preview of the upcoming report on the management of public reporting of UAPs, which has just been released this month. And I'm going to quote some key points of interest from the report. So should you wish to read the whole report in its entirety, I'm going to include a link down below to give you that option. But without further ado, and I quote, a message from the Chief Science Advisor of Canada. Whether satellites, drones, planes, or atmospheric events, no one would deny that there is more and more activity in the skies above us. Our ability to understand what we observe depends on a multitude of factors, such as time of day, cloud cover, distance, and color contrast. Rarely does anyone mistake a flock of geese flying in V formation for a fighter squadron flying at high altitudes. But sometimes, what is being observed in the sky is not immediately clear, and a person may wonder if what they are seeing is a natural phenomenon, a new type of aircraft, or something else altogether. The world of aviation continues to grow and diversify, serving business, national defense, tourism, and recreational needs. More than 100,000 commercial flights take place every day around the world. Engineers seek to improve the shape of aircraft and find lighter, stronger materials to make them faster and more efficient. To save energy and reduce the environmental impact of air travel, there are even plans to use airships and balloons of various types for passenger transportation and cargo. Meanwhile, drone technology is becoming increasingly affordable and ever more impressive, allowing virtually anyone to pilot devices as small as a bird or as large as a vehicle. Can we identify these devices at night as well as during the day? Can we accurately assess their distance and speed based solely on their navigation lights? Social media and the internet have it all, from the good and the very good to the bad and the ugly. Which Canadian website can people visit to report sightings of unidentified aerial phenomena? To which official organization can they send photos, videos, or detailed descriptions for help in understanding what they cannot explain on their own? It was with these questions in mind that we launched the Skye Canada Project. Now, our goal was to find the current resources and processes in place for handling and following up on UAP reports, to compare them with the best practices in other countries, and to make recommendations for potential improvements. Accordingly, this report focuses on the services available to the Canadian public for reporting UAPs and not the UAPs themselves. Understanding this distinction is critical to reading the report. The Skye Canada Project is not about investigating what UAPs are. It is about the science informing and serving everyone. End quote. So what does this mean? This project is making sure we have reliable, effective systems in place that they're backed by science, so that if anyone sees something strange in the sky, they can easily report it, get the most up-to-date, proper help and information. And yeah, I mean, most people get so curious about what they're seeing, and it's totally acceptable to maybe misinterpret what you are seeing because you just think, oh my gosh, like the way it's moving the lights, it's an alien, it's a UFO. And so this program is designed to provide the resources so that you can find a logical explanation for what you saw, and not to pull away and discredit, like, oh, it's not really anything mysterious like a UFO or anything like that. There are UFOs, there are UAPs, that's a real thing, but sometimes it's not always that. But I digress. In the world of cryptids and mysteries, to have something scientifically backed, it's a huge step forward and something many are trying to work towards when it comes to Sasquatch in particular. But it's also a major sense of comfort, like I was alluding to, when you have a reliable answer to seeing something that may terrify you or leave you breathless and uncertain. And I quote, "Some public sources estimate that Canadians report somewhere between 600 to 1,000 UAP sightings annually." Now, according to the survey commission for the Skye Canada project, 1 in 4 respondents say they have personally witnessed a UAP in their lifetime. However, only 10% reported their sightings, and 40% of respondents would not know who to contact for reporting. Interestingly, a majority of respondents support the establishment of a federal government service to gather UAP reports and make findings publicly available. End quote. So back onto the statistics train, let's talk about the perceptions of UAPs. Now, this information is sourced from the same Skye Canada project publishing. I thought this was very fun and very interesting just to kind of go through and read what all of these statistics are, and it's kind of enlightening. So, number 1, overall, how concerned, if at all, would you say you are with UAPs observed over Canadian territory? And we have 5% who are very concerned, 25% somewhat concerned, 36% not very concerned, 29% not at all concerned, 5% didn't know, had no response, and after calculations, this means a minority of respondents, 30%, are concerned with UAPs in Canada. And number 2, how strongly do you agree or disagree with the statement? UAPs represent an issue for flight safety in Canada. 10% strongly agree, 29% somewhat agree, 22 neither nor disagree, and 12% somewhat disagree, 11% strongly disagree, and 15% don't know, no response. This means that nearly 40% of respondents consider that UAPs represent a flight safety issue. Number 3, how strongly do you agree or disagree with this statement? The nature of some UAPs has not been confirmed. 23% strongly agree, 32 somewhat agree, 19 neither agree nor disagree, 5% somewhat disagree, 5% strongly disagree, and 16% don't know, no response. This means that over half, 55% of Canadian respondents agree that the nature of some UAPs has not been confirmed. Number 4, how strongly do you agree or disagree with each of the following statements? Number 1, I believe there is false information about UAPs in social media. And number 2, I believe there is false information about UAPs in mainstream media. So for number 1, with social media, 36% strongly agree, 30% somewhat agree, 16 neither agree nor disagree, 4% somewhat disagree, 3% strongly disagree, 11 don't know. And for number 2, it's 23% strongly believe, 32 somewhat agree, 21 neither agree nor disagree, 5% somewhat disagree, 4% strongly disagree, and 15% don't know or no response. This means that the majority of respondents believe that there is false information about UAPs in social and mainstream media. Number 5, what do you think is behind or the source of UAPs? 71% say they don't know or had no response. 10% are saying aliens or extraterrestrial life, while 6% say foreign government or spies, 5% say natural phenomena, weather, celestial objects, 4% say drones, satellites, aircraft, weather balloons, 3% say government, federal government, another 3% says military, and 5% say other, and 1% say nothing. Now, I appreciate the honesty. We can't just boldly claim without evidence that, hey, it's aliens. But to see 71% of people state they don't know, to me, at least, it feels like, hey, they're very open to learning the truth and accepting the truth if it's backed by facts and science, if science can even comprehend what these things possibly are. So when I see 71% don't know or no response, that's more of a positive than a negative, where you see 10% say aliens or extraterrestrial life. That's bold because we don't have the science to back that. Now, number 6, and we're nearing the end of this, I promise. How strongly do you agree or disagree with the statement? At present, there is no proof of the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations. 25% strongly agree, 21% somewhat agree, 23% neither agree nor disagree, 12 somewhat disagree, 6 strongly disagree, and 13% don't know or no response. This means that only half of the respondents agree that there is no proof of the existence of extraterrestrial civilization. Now, the list of percentages goes on and on and on, so I'm going to wrap it up with this last one. Over the course of your life, have you ever seen an object or phenomenon in the sky that you could not identify? If so, when did this occur? 27% said yes, 5% said don't know, no response, 68% said no. And this, of course, this breakdown, 11% said within the last year, 21% said 2 to 5 years ago, 22% said 6 to 10 years ago, 43% said more than 10 years ago, and 3% said don't know, no response. This means that 1 in 4 respondents, 27%, claim to have had a personal experience with a UAP over the course of their life. Those are strong odds, and like I said, if you check out the report, you'll find a dozen more charts compiling data from respondents on UFO, UAP related questions. It's interesting though, because as the report closes out, it details how 49% of respondents would support the government of Canada dedicating public funds to investigating UAP sightings. Now, I know I personally would support our tax dollars going towards learning more about these things, because tax dollars, that's a whole other topic, but I feel like they're not being put to the best use right now in Canada, but I digress. So, as I said, I would support them going towards something like this program to learn, because, of course, we aren't solely thinking of aliens here, just in general, learning what these things are to help prevent commercial airline accidents and to provide a bit more security in Canadian airspace as well as our allies. Those are huge, huge pros as to why we want to be investing in this and learning the truth. In closing, though, to this week's episode, we're going to highlight the Falcon Lake incident. This is May 20th, 1967, within Whiteshell Provincial Park in the Canadian province of Manitoba. The incident itself was investigated by various Canadian authorities, including the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Royal Canadian Air Force, Department of Health, National Defense, and several American authorities as well. And I quote, Stephen McCalloch resided with his family in River Heights, Winnipeg, and worked as an industrial mechanic. He was also an amateur geologist and would regularly travel to Falcon Lake as a prospector searching for quartz and silver. Now, Steve had previously staked a claim in the Falcon Lake area to prospect for precious metals and left home on a long weekend in May of 1967. He was aware that quartz veins within the Precambrian portions of the Canadian Shield within Whiteshell Provincial Park yielded precious metals such as gold and nickel, and whilst inspecting a quartz vein embedded within the Canadian Shield strata, Steve stated he was suddenly startled by the sounds of a flock of geese who appeared agitated due to an object. Now, Steve looked up and saw 2 objects hovering about 45 meters away from him. They were both emitting a reddish glow. He described the objects as cigarette-shaped things with humps in the middle. End quote. Now, Steve had assumed it was an American experimental aircraft, but suddenly one of the objects actually landed on a nearby rocky platform and took on a disc shape, while the other craft flew off after hovering in the air for several minutes. After observing the landed craft, Steve had actually sketched out the object for, he says it's about half an hour before he decided to approach the craft. Now, he attempted to find any type of identifying insignia, finding none, but he did notice that the craft lacked any seams. It was a very smooth metallic surface, and it was resembling a sort of colored glass. It was about 10.5 meters, which is 34 feet in length, and 4.5 meters, 15 feet in height. Now, the landed craft also changed color between gray and red with a golden glow emanating around it. Now, Steve recalled the scent of sulfur and very warm air being emitted by the craft, hearing whirring sounds as well as hissing sounds being expelled. So Steve had observed that the craft had an open door on its side with bright lights, and within the craft, he could hear the voices of individuals, which were muffled by the sounds produced, I should say. So the speakers reportedly sounded human, but Steve tried to communicate through a variety of different languages, human languages like Polish, Russian, and finally some German, and after doing so, it resulted in an immediate silence from the victims in question. Steve kept interacting with the object, but eventually found himself inside the craft with a lack thereof instant recollection. Light beams and panels flashed various colors, and the craft had appeared to be empty, and so Steve decided to leave, walk away from the ship. Now 3 panels had slid into the seal of the craft, and this prompted him to touch the craft, to which he found was exceptionally hot. The fingertips of his gloves, as he reported, had actually melted a bit. The craft then began to move. It quickly turned counterclockwise, and now Steve began to experience severe disorientation from the event when the object vanished from the area, but it did not leave the area unscathed. A blast of heated gas emitted from a panel with a grid of holes that hit Steve right in his chest, blowing him backwards. Now, this resulted in burns on his chest and stomach that matched his claim of being hit by the exhaust panel. A grid-like pattern of raised sores from his burns, Steve claimed his clothing was set ablaze, and he immediately tore the burning clothes off as the craft was flying away. After everything had concluded, Steve attempted to return to his motel room at the Falcon Motor Hotel, but he was just feeling nauseous and eventually vomited, so police eventually caught up with him and had assumed he had been drinking, but noted he did not smell of alcohol. Eventually, Steve died in 1999, and he believed what he saw was an experimental craft. Now, right up until his passing, that's what he swore that he had seen. Reports made all claim that he never pushed for what he saw to be of extraterrestrial origin, but it didn't stop this case from gathering much public attention, having been featured in Unsolved Mysteries Season 5, Episode 8, and appearing in several other publishings and serving as inspiration for other films and TV shows. Documents collected that pertain to the incident were eventually donated to the University of Manitoba archives in 2019, along with burned articles of clothing that were mentioned in Steve's encounter. But what do you think? Skeptics seem to attribute this experience and the burns to alcohol abuse, but we can see there is evidence to Steve's point that no alcohol was involved, but I digress. Remember, you can reach us directly at CryptidClues@gmail.com. I am your host, Taylor. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode. I hope it was out of this world and you had a good time. We'll be back next week, so make sure you take care and stay safe.